look at what I think is one of the most kind of overlooked parts of running a efficient and successful IT organization, and that is problem management. I'm sure at some point in your careers you've heard problem management. It's something that often gets incorrectly defined. I feel like it kind of it's kind of gotten taken out of context in a lot of different areas of specifically the IT space. And so, it was a topic that I felt pretty passionate about around wanting to make sure we could dive into what is problem management, how do we integrate it into your IT operations, what should that look like, and how do we be successful? All right, so we're going to dive into that today, and we're going to talk about a couple different things here. Kind of first and foremost, we want to define what is problem management. Obviously, I talked about it. It kind of gets incorrectly defined in our space. So, what is it? We want to understand what it is, and then we're going to work through kind of that problem management process. On the heels of that, we're going to look at challenges in problem management. There is a myriad of challenges when it comes to not just kind of implementing some problem management, but kind of efficiently running a problem management process to the point where you start to see the benefits, right, of having it in place. So we're going to walk through some of those challenges, walk through some examples there, and start to build what I said, we kind of build a knowledge base of, okay, these are the things that I'm going to run into as we start to build out a problem management process. We start to build out a little maturity within how we deal with those. And we'll make sure that you guys are kind of well equipped to, when you face those challenges, it's not kind of deer in the headlights. From there, we're going to look at some tools and techniques. So there's a ton of different frameworks and kind of compliance around problem management. ITIL, obviously the big one. Six Sigma is one that we were able to kind of take some different foundational elements, especially in the space that we work in. So we'll look at some of those tools and techniques, and then we'll look at some of those root cause analysis methods that will help us build a better process, which having those tools and techniques will help us dramatically overcome a lot of those challenges that we talked about a minute ago. Then we're going to look at best practices. The big piece of kind of every episode in this series was to give you guys some tangible takeaways. So here's we talk about all these things, but what can you do, right? What can you as the listener do to say, okay, I know what it is, I know what the challenges are, I know how to deal with it. Now, how do I implement it? Where do I get started? That's often where people kind of pump the brakes, is they're like, this is all great, this sounds good, I don't know how to get started. So we're going to walk through some of those. How do I get started? What do I implement? How do I implement it? All right, let's dive in. Okay, so first thing first, like we said, we want to understand what problem management is. What is it? So it's a process that's basically there to identify and manage root causes of incidents in an IT environment. Or really any kind of environment. In our space, obviously, we're concerned about the IT environment. Problem management and incident management often get incorrectly interchanged or incorrectly defined. I'm not sure how many of you are ITIL certified. ITIL, obviously, the framework where a lot of this stuff comes from, but they are completely different things. Let's look at kind of the differences between incident management and problem management, because being able to implement a solid problem management strategy, problem management process, is going to be understanding the difference between the two. Most organizations are very good at incident management. They're very good at fixing things, right? Not a lot of companies, not a lot of enterprises. Something that we all struggle with is, okay, we know how to fix things when they break. How do we keep them from breaking, right? That's where we really start to see the benefit as an organization of, let's keep the fire from ever starting, right? Let's put some preventative measures in place to where our guys aren't constantly firefighting, because it's a it's a slippery slope. It tends to have a snowball effect, especially in IT. Is once you start getting into this mode of firefighting, it's very hard to get out of that. So incident management, what is it? So incident management focuses on immediate issue resolution to limit production downtime. So our goal in an incident, if you've ever been an incident commander, you've ever been, incident supervisor, you understand that your job is to get whatever is broken fixed as quickly as possible. Now, a lot of times that is at the detriment of we're so focused on getting things fixed as quickly as possible that sometimes we do things that actually work in complete opposite of allowing us the ability to establish a root cause. So we're so focused over here on getting the issue fixed that we forget that maybe I'm doing something and I'm just going to reboot. I'm going to reboot a piece of equipment just to bring it back online. Well, if we do that, maybe we've lost all the logs now. Maybe you don't have a centralized logging solution. Maybe now you've completely hindered your ability to establish a root cause. So they play on each other, right? And we need to understand that while obviously from an incident perspective, our focus is to restore production service as quickly as possible, we definitely don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize our ability to determine a root cause. We'll talk about why we don't want to jeopardize our ability to establish a root cause here momentarily. So another piece of incident management, it's almost purely operational. There's no kind of forward thinking in incident management. It's very in the moment, right? I have a problem, as engineers, as technicians, I have a problem. My job is to fix that problem. I'm not thinking about 2 weeks from now. I'm not thinking about a month from now. I'm not thinking about anything else. My job is to fix the problem. It's very reactive, what we just talked about, right? You're not thinking about past or present incident. You were in the moment. How do I fix this? Now we know what incident management is. Let's shift, right? Let's go to the other side of the fence. Let's go to problem management. Problem management focuses on the remediation of the underlying root cause of the issue to keep it from happening again. Incident management, fix the issue, just get it fixed. Problem management, hey, what can we do to keep us from having to fix it? Naturally, that's very strategic, right? Problem management, while it is a part of the operations process, it is a strategic line of thinking. So what we're doing there is we're saying, hey, we had these issues. Let's figure out what we need to do to keep these issues from happening. That may be several different things. It may be changing a configuration. It may be skipping a firmware. It may be upgrading a firmware. It may be replacing a piece of equipment. It is proactive. That's the point I'm trying to make. Problem management is nearly 100% proactive. The goal, again, is we want to focus on how do we keep those incidents from happening, right? We're looking through a lens of reducing the amount of time that our technicians or engineers are engaged in problems. The biggest piece of that is how do we keep them from happening in the first place? So we're going to continue on the theme of understanding problem management. Let's look at some goals. So some of these, I'm sure your wheels are already turning, right? You can kind of understand the goals. I mean, they're kind of blatantly obvious as we go through this. On one we already talked about, right? Our goal is to identify and resolve the root cause of incidents. We're not fixing incidents at this point. We're not fixing the issue. We're fixing the root cause. I know some of you probably are well aware, fixing the issue at hand and fixing the root cause, different ends of the spectrum, right? They're completely different. I can go fix an issue and not fix what's actually causing it. And sometimes what's causing an issue may not be technical in nature at all. Maybe it's process related. We'll get into some of that. Maybe it's procedural. Maybe it's an external factor. Maybe it doesn't always have to be technical in nature. We always want to assume that, well, there's a technical problem, so there's a technical root cause. That's not the case. And I'm going to tell you why, because a lot of it really amounts to how far you dig. Some people think they've gotten to a root cause. It's easy for you to kind of get in this weird space where you're like, oh, okay, I've identified a root cause. Maybe it's not actually the root cause. Maybe this is a step in the process of identifying the root cause. And again, we'll get into those. We want to prevent the reoccurrence of incidents. There is a large portion of time that we as IT assets, IT resources spend on remediating incidents. We often get stuck in kind of the trap of, well, I need more people. That may be the case. In an IT organization, you may just be, hey, we just don't have enough bodies, right? We need more people. We need more doers. But sometimes it behooves us to take a step back and say, are there processes that we can put in place that would reduce the amount of workload on one individual? You look at an average, let's say a 40-hour week. We'll take a round number and say IT technician works a 40-hour week. On a bad week, you may spend 15, 18 hours of that 40-hour week working incidents, working fires, acting as a firefighter. That's 40 to 50% of your week gone, right? That's not time. There's a huge opportunity cost to having to fight fires. There's been several studies that have been done around basically what we call contact switching. A technician or engineering, it is a proven fact that it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for an individual to swap from one task to the other and be at a productive state. So if I'm having to constantly switch from fire to fire to fire, I may lose an hour a day in that contact switching. I may lose an hour of productivity, which is nothing but me saying, okay, I'm jumping from this call where I was putting out a fire to this call where I'm putting out another fire. That 10, 15, 20 minutes that you're spending between those contact switching, we could have prevented that, right? And through problem management, through implementing some processes, you could have prevented the reoccurrence of maybe issues that are happening regularly. So the last goal is what we all do on a daily basis is we want to improve the overall stability and performance of a network, period. That is our jobs, right? We want to ensure that the networks that we're responsible for are as reliable, are as stable, and provide the highest level of performance possible. If we're able to look at problem management and say, I'm going to take these incidents, I'm going to accurately identify the root cause, and I'm going to reduce the amount of time that we're spending on incidents by proactively fixing those things, proactively addressing that root cause. I'm by default increasing stability, reliability, and the performance of the network. And that's our end goal, right? Let's look at some of the benefits. Number one, we touched on it just a little bit a minute ago. We want to reduce downtime, right? By addressing the root cause, we're reducing the frequency and duration of service disruption. Keep in mind, it may not be 4 or 5 different incidents. Those 4 or 5 different incidents could be an hour each. Now we're talking about 4 to 5 hours of downtime. We want to implement something that we can reduce that as much as possible. So one of our benefits is we're reducing downtime by having a mature problem management process. Number 2 is cost savings. This is one that I think gets missed by a lot of kind of the doers in our space, the guys that are actually turning the cogs, right? The guys that are actually making things run on a daily basis. I've seen guys, I used to think the same way, early in my career is, well, they're paying me, so it doesn't really matter if I'm working on this issue over here, I'm working on this over here. It's all the same. That could not be further from the truth, right? There are opportunity and costs associated with, if you've got an engineer who's spending 30 to 40% of their time every week putting out fires, that is a significant cost to the organization in that you are strictly reactive. There's no strategy. That's time you don't have to build better processes, to build a more stable network, to build a more reliable network, to move the organization forward from an IT standard, because you're spending 40 to 50% of your time over here working on fires. So there's a huge cost savings associated with that. It may not be a billable line item. It may not be a line item on an OpEx report, but it is absolutely a cost. Number 3, improve service quality. We mentioned it just a minute ago on the last slide. We want to make things as stable as possible for the organization, because in the end, if things are stable, the organization can function at a very high level. We like to say we want to get organizations out of the business of IT. We want to do that IT work for them as an MSP. So when you look into your organizations, your goal is we want to make things as stable, as reliable as possible so that our user satisfaction is extremely high. That will go a long way in establishing new process, new procedure for your users. They'll be more receptible to that stuff because they know that there's a track record of hey, we don't think about the network. There are issues in the network are minimal. And the last one, and often overlooked, is knowledge management. We see quite a bit. It kind of runs rampant in IT in general, just the lack of documentation. You'll see this as a common thread as we move through the webinar, but the lack of documentation contributes to a massive amount of time loss and production downtime just because there's no documentation of things. A very large piece, you'll see it later, around building an effective strategy and problem management is establishing the knowledge base, establishing a point of reference so that technicians, engineers, whoever it may be, can go and say, I've seen this issue's happened multiple times. This is clearly a problem. We need to address this. So I promise you we get into some of the challenges. So here we go. One of the biggest challenges for organizations when it comes to problem management is very simply identifying root causes. I know that seems like, well, yeah, that's part of it. That's a problem. It goes deeper than that because accurately identifying the root cause is often complex and time consuming. It's seen as unnecessary. Like I said, we often get into the rut of we just need to fix the problem and then we go into the next problem. Well, if I'm hopping from fire to fire to fire to fire to fire, I'm never going to get out of that. It's just going to be that cycle. It's a very vicious cycle. And it's very hard to unwind. So one of the biggest challenges that we see is organizations just wanting to dedicate the time to properly identifying the root cause. We see a lot of kind of pencil whipping in the it was switch went down. That was the root cause. Well, why did the switch go down? They don't go they just don't fall over. Did it lose power? Something happened that caused that switch to become an issue. 2, another big one, resource constraints. This kind of rolls right up into identifying root causes can be time consuming. A lot of times we see where organizations just have limited resource constraints. They have limited resources, whether it be, because of time, like you see on the screen, whether it be from a personnel standpoint, whether it be from a budget standpoint. Those limited resources can often put problem management on the back burner, right? It's very singularly focused on just fix the problem. A lot of times that's because, organizations don't have the right tool set. They just don't have enough people, right? It is very firefight kind of mode all the time. But I think you'll see as we move through here, if we can implement some of these best practices, tools and techniques, it will allow us to reduce the amount of time that it takes to identify root cause and to establish a formal problem management process. Communication gaps. We often see this in larger organizations where departments tend to be siloed or positions tend to be very siloed. Large enterprise, it's very easy to, I just mentioned it, become very singularly focused and say, well, this is my job. I just need to know what I'm doing, and what everybody else is doing is kind of not my business. This leads to these poor communication skills, especially between departments or business areas, often leads to, at best, kind of delays in problem resolution, but also just a complete misunderstanding of root cause or just a problem in general. I can think just personally in my career, I worked for a large production company for quite a while. And there were several different production teams within the organization. All of those production teams kind of had their own way of wanting to do something. They kind of had their own processes and how they engaged with IT. And as an IT organization, when I look back on it, we kind of allowed that to happen, which was probably at a detriment to the company as a whole. But in reality, what was happening is you had kind of 3 areas of the business who were all part of the production team, but they kind of had their own way of doing things. So what we would see there is we'd have a production team, come to IT and basically request a solution or request the resolution of an issue. And so we start digging into that with them and then we make a decision on what way we're going to go, or how we're going to kind of remedy a problem without thinking about the impact of this other part of the organization over here. Oftentimes that would lead to just us completely misunderstanding the ask, or completely missing an entire piece of the business that would have benefited or could have been negatively impacted from a change we were going to make. So it's important in ensuring that we're spending the appropriate amount of time in managing our problems to ensure that we don't allow these communication gaps to emerge. We talked a little bit about it on change when we talked about change management, change control process last week. We want to make sure that we're communicating. You'll kind of see a theme throughout all of this series of communication's key, right? It's the same with problem management. We want to make sure we're over communicating to ensure that as an IT organization, we have all of the data that we need to make an informed decision. What we talked about just a second ago, lack of documentation, right? I can't tell you how many times, even as we continue to see it, a lack of documentation makes things often turns small. We use the old adage, making a mountain out of a molehill. A lot of times that's what happens. A lack of documentation can cause a very small issue, very small problem to kind of balloon into, now we have a very big problem, right? So that lack of documentation is a challenge in trying to make sure that we're building an effective problem management strategy. So we want to address that. So the goal of these is, right, we want to start overcoming challenges, right? We want to get these challenges off the board. If we're going to address the challenges, we got to start coming up with solutions, right? So we're going to use these same, and then we're going to start building some solutions. So we look at identifying root cause. How do we solve that? So we talked a little bit about implementing some root cause analysis techniques. The two that we use most frequently at Plow are what's called the 5 whys, and then a fishbone diagram. So if any of you guys are familiar with Six Sigma, you definitely have heard of both of those. 5 whys is mentioned in ITIL. There's some other techniques, but we feel that these are the most efficient ways to kind of overcome that. Identifying root cause is complex and it's time consuming, and we don't know how to do it. We'll talk about 5 whys and the fishbone in the upcoming slides, but this is going to be establishing an RCA technique. One that works for you is critical in kind of the foundational level of building a good strategy. Resource constraints. So not every problem carries the same weight or carries the same criticality. And we have a defined criticality matrix at Plow that we try to use to place problems on a map, essentially, and say, where does this fit in? Is this an extremely critical problem? Is this a borderline critical? Is this a non-critical problem? For organizations who have resource constraints, whether it be tooling or personnel, the easiest way to kind of overcome that or to balance that out is to build some prioritization around the impact and urgency. If we have a problem that's identified and it only affects 7 people out of a 7,000 employee company, obviously that's going to be pretty low on the impact and urgency scale. Now, if that problem entails it is the 7 people who know the payroll system, that then slides up the scale, right? So now it becomes higher on the impact and urgency. Basically placing these problems on a board and say, these are the ones we're going to think about, and the rest of them we'll take on as we have time, will allow you to kind of level out, reduce some of those resource constraints so that you can still build an effective problem management strategy, even though you may have limited resources. We've talked about this at length. I talked about it in last month's webinar. Communication is key. Fostering a culture of open communication is key. It's key in several areas of our industry. Identifying who needs to be involved in the process, identifying kind of critical stakeholders, making sure that those critical stakeholders are aligned from a strategy standpoint. It's one thing to get everybody on a phone call and spend 30 minutes kind of jib-jabbering back and forth. But it's another thing to say, okay, we're gonna make sure that everybody who's involved is aligned in what the mission is, right? We're gonna make sure that everybody's aligned into what we're trying to accomplish. Documentation, we talked about establishing a knowledge base. having a knowledge base, knowledge management system, whatever you want to call it, having that for reference, for resources, for, whether it be technical resources, whether it be leadership resources, having a knowledge base and then keeping up with the knowledge base, keeping it updated with new articles, keeping it up with updates, keeping it up with lessons learned. A big one that we push here at Plow is anytime we have an incident that we're able to learn something from, that should be put into a knowledge base, right? That should be put somewhere where somebody after me, if this happens again, they can reference that, and maybe they gain something from lessons learned. Maybe they, by having that documentation, they're able to reduce the overall impact to the organization by being able to reference all of that. All right. So talked about tools and techniques. The first one I want to jump into is what's called the fishbone. So the fishbone is designed to help us identify possible root cause so that we're not reinventing the wheel every time we need to identify root cause, perform a root cause analysis, or just in general, figure out what a problem is, right? So at the head of our fish here, you can see network downtime. So this is going to be pretty generic, right? You can make these as granular or as generic as possible. I went to a little bit generic here so we can kind of cover a broad spectrum. So our problem, again, at the head of the fish is going to be network downtime. So each one of these ribs of this fish represent a category of possible cause of network downtime. Hardware, you can see software, people, processes, environment, and external factors. So all of those encompass kind of specific areas that could potentially be the root cause of network downtime. You look at people, let's look at people. So what about people? Lack of training, could be human error. Maybe somebody just messed up a configuration. And then when we talked about it, could be a lack of communication. Take environment. So maybe it's a power outage. Maybe it's physical damage to the equipment, to the hardware. Or maybe one that we don't see often is temperature fluctuations. Maybe you got a server room on a production floor that had a window AC unit, and that window AC unit's gone out. Maybe temperature's risen in that room. Equipment starts to shut down, thermal throttling, whatever it may be. That could be a cause of network downtime. The fishbone is designed for you to be able to reference, so that again, every time we're not having to reinvent the wheel of what are the common problem areas, and within those problem areas, what are the common root causes. I still come back to this thing, man, quite often. We have a problem. Let's say we have a problem, and we're kind of spinning our wheels on. Maybe we're not getting anywhere. Maybe we're not understanding. Maybe there's a lack of documentation. Maybe we've tried a lot of things. We're not making any traction. Sometimes I'll come back to a fishbone and be like, all right, what am I missing here? What am I not thinking about? What could be causing this issue that I'm just overlooking? Sometimes it's easy. It's as easy as me coming back to this and saying, oh, okay, yeah, I want to check that. I didn't, we talked about software, but man, now I'm thinking it might be a failed update. Maybe an update pushed and maybe that didn't take well. I know it doesn't look like it, but having this to be able to visualize and just kind of trigger maybe some things in your brain around, okay, that's something I want to look at. Having a defined fishbone, a couple fishbones for different kind of problem sets will go a long way in helping you build a strategy of reducing the total amount of production downtime, reducing that kind of overhead, so that you can more accurately, more efficiently diagnose root cause, build an efficient problem management strategy. The next one we're going to look at is called the 5 whys. Arguably my favorite because it reminds me of a 5-year-old kid. Essentially what the 5 whys are, you may already be familiar. Essentially what the 5 whys are us asking essentially the same question 5 times until we get to the root cause. I can't tell you how silly this sounds, but I can't tell you how many times I've used this to either identify a root cause or put me on the path to identification. So we're going to take an example here. We're going to say the internet's out in the HR department. Okay, so first question we're going to ask, why? Why is it out in the HR department? Well, switch can't get to the internet. Okay, why can't the switch get to the internet? Well, The uplink interface is down. Okay, all right, we're getting somewhere. Why is the uplink interface down? Well, looks like a MAC filtering policy disabled it. Hold on, wait a minute. Okay, why did a MAC filtering policy disable it? Well, looks like that MAC address isn't on the approved list. Why is that MAC address? I mean, this is a piece of production equipment. Why isn't that MAC address on the approved list? Well, change control didn't approve the list. So that's our root cause. I can't tell you how many times we see where root cause gets put somewhere between 2 and 3. Well, root cause was the uplink interface was down. Why was the uplink in? No, that's not the root cause, right? That's not acceptable. Why was the uplink interface down? Oh, okay. Now we're digging. Oh, okay. MAC filtering policy disabled it. Wait, why did a MAC filtering policy? This is a piece of production equipment. So you can see how sometimes we get stuck in the second or third why, right? We need to keep asking why until we essentially get to the point where, oh, change control didn't approve it. Okay, that is something that I can build process on. That is something that we can fix. Uplink interface is down. Okay, I can bring the uplink interface back up, right? But what's going to happen? MAC filtering policy is just going to disable it again. So we've not fixed it. We fixed it, but the next time the MAC filtering policy pushes, or there's a scan run, or some kind of NAC is involved, going to shut it off again. So we didn't even accurately identify the root cause. Whereas if we go all the way down, we go through the 5 whys, we say change control didn't approve the list, that I can fix. Okay, now change control is going to approve all the list moving forward. We're going to add that MAC address to the approved list. Now we've identified the root cause. So again, 5 whys, huge, going to be huge in helping you build a process around just better overall problem management. Okay, so I promised you some takeaways, right? We always try to provide some takeaways on these things so that you can leave these feeling like you've gained something. Number 1, proactive problem detection. No secret, we use a lot of different monitoring tools here at Plow. The biggest thing I can tell you here is when you have an incident, make sure that that incident gets documented. Make sure that all of that information gets documented, because the biggest advantage that you're going to have is being able to detect patterns. So if I have an incident and I document it, and then 3 days later I have another incident, same incident, I document it, and then a month from now I have the same incident and I document it, I've got a little bit of a knowledge base here that I can say this is a problem. Okay, now we need to take these incidents, we need to shift them to a problem, and we need to identify the root cause. Again, a lot of times in incidents and fight, we're in a firefight, we're focused on fixing the problem, right? When in reality, we need to make sure that we fix the problem, and we also don't do anything to jeopardize fixing the root cause, identifying a larger problem, and making sure that we get that and we identify that root cause, and then we ultimately remediate that root cause. So proactively detecting the problem. There's a ton of monitoring and alerting tools. Won't go into that. You guys are very familiar with that. But essentially, the goal here is being able to detect problems before they become really, really, really big problems. And that is done through making sure that we isolate and we are properly documenting incidents so that we can detect larger problems once they start to occur. Thorough documentation. I mean, I feel like I've beat this one to death, but documenting problems, literally, we just talked about it through proactive problem detection, creating that knowledge base, maintaining, detailed logs of incidents that are happening or things that we're seeing on the network, building that database that we can reference, not only for you, but for other team members, building that database so that you can reference that, and anyone who comes in outside of you can reference that. In IT, we battle with kind of tribal knowledge. There's guys that have been there for a long time, and oftentimes it's hard to pull that information out of them, right? So that's why we say, hey, document. Put that stuff somewhere. Put it in a notepad document. Put it somewhere where I can reference it, where team members can reference it. Making sure that we have documentation is key. root cause analysis, right? Building some kind of RCA strategy, whether it be through the 5 whys, whether it be through a fishbone. If you want to institute a fault tree analysis, using the same approach every time is key in your RCA, so that you're identifying the problems as quickly and efficiently as possible, and going through that root cause analysis becomes second nature, right? It's just part of the process. You know, if I know that every time I'm going to use the same process, I know exactly what I'm going to do as soon as I start working on a problem. If I say, all right, on Tuesday, I'm going to try to get through a couple of these problems in the problem queue. If I know I have a structured method of how I'm going to do that, I can save myself a lot of time so that I'm not reinventing the wheel every time I have to do an RCA. And then collaboration, right? Can't stress enough peer review. Get other parties involved. Get having diverse perspectives from different team members oftentimes leads to a dramatically expedited resolution time. I mean, even our guys, we'll kind of peer review off of each other. I'll have one of our engineers call me and say, "Hey, I'm having this problem," and oh well, just talking to you, I think I might have kind of worked through in my brain what this might be. Just having someone to bounce ideas off of. It's not necessarily you going and looking for an answer. It's just kind of a collaborative effort of help me kind of work through this in my brain. Effective communication. I won't. I promise I won't beat this horse anymore. Clear lines of communication across all of your departments, all of your business areas, business entities, and then making sure that updates are getting pushed between each organization. Keeping people apprised of what's going on is key. We talked about this a little bit and how to reduce kind of those resource constraints, and that's through prioritization and categorization, right? So we want to prioritize problems. Make sure that we're prioritizing problems based on their business impact. So those critical ones, we want to work on those quickly. We want to they're high priority. Those ones that have a more limited scope and in their nature, we'll kind of get to those when we get to them, right? But building that prioritization is key, and starting to flush some of these things out. Something we haven't talked about too much, but is a big piece of this is training and development. We all kind of move at the speed of the industry, and it's a fast moving industry. But so I realize that keeping up with training is difficult sometimes. I mean, even us who's as an MSP, we have a lot of resources around training and what we have available to us. And a lot of times we're able to make that available to you guys, but it's hard to fit it in the schedule. It's hard to say, hey, I'm going to send a guy out and he's going to be gone for a day, or he's going to be gone for 2 or 3 days, especially if you're a small shop. You may be the only guy, right? And so, the idea of you being at a training session for a couple of days is unrealistic. There are ways to do some kind of self-service training. Get with us. Maybe we can do some training through, managed services or getting creative with making our engineers available to you guys to bounce ideas off of. But kind of the crux of this whole thing is making sure that we're training ourselves on how these techniques work, how we identify problems, how we manage problems, how we are able to push them to provide a remedy to a lot of these root causes. It's key in allowing us to kind of push things forward. There's a ton, like I said, there's a ton of certifications out there. ITIL, obviously a big one, Six Sigma, a big one as well, and kind of Lean Six Sigma. Always continue to be learning these things as you're moving along. One thing that we're big on in Plow is leveraging technology. We do quite a bit with automation and are really starting to move towards AI and having that kind of integrated into our services model. But use the tools you have. There are a ton of free resources out there now. The internet is an ever-growing bastion of resource wealth. So go out there and leverage some automation. Look at what you can do to maybe some more or subdued automation around just maybe email alerts or using some through Microsoft SharePoint. There's some things you can do with workflows. Leverage some of that stuff to try to help you as you're building your strategy of how you're going to kind of tackle problem management use the tools that you have around you to kind of help you build a holistic strategy.